talking to us about something that is extremely relevant to this weekend, which is thinking globally and acting locally, the Druids' perspective. Penny Billington. Are you switched on?
I think
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Penny
I
Billington.
must, yes. Thank you. There have been references to Druids this weekend, which are very interesting. And first of all, what a fantastic weekend. Absolutely brilliant. This is covered with notes of what other people said. So if I get mixed up, you'll have to excuse me, because I've just gleaned all this wisdom, and I'm amazed at how people take core ideas and just express them in their own particular way. You know, and isn't this what nature teaches us about diversity and difference? Always being good. So I've heard mention of Druid faith this weekend, and the Druidry that I practiced, I would not say has any faith. And I don't think that that stops it, debars it from being a religion, because the Charity Commissioner's definition of religion actually would debar most of the major religions of the world. Druids live lightly. Druids aims to live lightly, not only ecologically, that is our duty, but in spirit. So I think a true Druid would say, just because it's important, it doesn't always have to be serious. You know, and if you get a deep, heavy Druid, you know, maybe they haven't quite got the point. Maybe they're just trying to tell you that they're wise, you know, whereas the dancing fool might actually teach you a lot more. So we should dance with life, because the OBOD itself is an international teaching order. So one might think that that's a little humorous. You can be a correspondence course Druid. What a humorous idea. Brilliant. When people smile and laugh together, that is a point of connection. You don't say, we're spooky, we're deep, we're dark, we're powerful, you must fear us. We say, hey, look at us. You know. And people like it. And then we have a connection with them, and then we have interaction. And that's what life is all about. Druidry is relational, not just with other human beings, but more importantly with the whole of the natural world. And I'm very proud of the OBOD course. I can be proud of it because I was nothing to do with writing of it. I was just a happy recipient of its wisdom, because it's the one modern nature-based spirituality that points out the importance of two things. And the first is creativity. If you're not being a creative being, then you're sort of existing rather than living. And the second is service. The Druids of old were of service to their communities. So you can practice your spirituality in your bedroom, but actually, if it doesn't translate into doing something for your community, then you're not quite getting the point. And to do something for your community does not mean you have to go along and say, I am a Druid. I will save this playground from becoming a car park, which I helped do recently. Because often those labels get in the way of the work and people connecting. The fact is, I do these things. I'm basically lazy like the rest of us, but to be a person of integrity and call myself a Druid, I have to make that extra effort. And the fact is, my Druidry that's informing that is enough for me. Sometimes it might be helpful to sound a Druid, sometimes it might not. It's not about the robe wearing, although that is tremendous fun, and we love doing that as well. When we try and forge a spirituality for very changing times, we're not going back to the Druids of old and trying to reconstruct what they did. There is no killing of bulls. There's no strange arcane practices from yesteryear. What we do, we look at what was written about the Druids of old and what we can gain from that. So that's the commentaries of the Greek and Romans. We remember that commentaries are written by the victors. So we take some of this stuff with a pinch of salt. If there were things that Druids of old did that we wouldn't approve of these days, well, every culture changes. We all act in the fashion of the times. When I grew up, when I was a tiny child, there was still capital punishment in this country, which was not seen as anything wrong, except, of course, the climate of opinion changed. What I'm saying is I don't make excuses for any mistakes my forebears might have done. I take the best of what was written about them, which was that they were teachers, judges, they had an international reputation, they were the masters of the natural sciences, they knew the laws of the heavens. Fabulous. So they're in touch with the natural world. Then I go also, and there was one other very important thing, which is it was said that the bards, the creative ranks of the Druids, could stop warring armies by walking through the middle of them. This great belief that the creative arts, that music particularly, music and song and words, could stop warring factions. And I think given the sort of tenor of the talks this weekend, I think that's a very pertinent point to make. So Druids have always been peacemakers. Then we go to archaeology, also to find out more about our ancestors. And although we all know the full flowering of the Druids was a small 400-year window of time, I believe spirituality is going to come out of nowhere. And I believe that those who went before were I call them the proto-Druids, the indigenous priests of these lands who put up the stone circles. So I don't make any apologies for finding them very relevant to modern Druidry. And the third place we go to for our knowledge about Druids are the oldest myths and legends that have been written. So we go to bards like Taliesin, we go to manuscripts which were made into books like the Mabinogion. And we'll get on to the lessons we can learn from those a bit later. But my job as a modern Druid is to obey my intuitive sense that we are all connected with the land and we are at our healthiest and sanest and most useful to the society of our other human beings and the natural world when we actively pursue that connection. And often when I'm getting wet and cold and white robe, you see, muddy up to the armpits, I think, if only I was a ceremonial magician and I could just hang around in an incense-filled basement and wave a sword about. Now, no disrespect to ceremonial magicians, some of my best friends are. But I just think there is a reason we're all called to a special path, and I, who always cold, always chilly, am drawn to Druidry and the outdoor world. So that's the way the cards have fallen, and that's what I do now. So the idea of Druidry, as with all the magical systems, because it's a secret of Druidry, because Druidry is an experiential path, so the secret is you can't have the experience unless you do it. Like all magical paths, the goal of Druidry is to marry up and make coherent and congruent the inner and the outer reality so that we can help to co-create our lives and our societies and the world around us for the good of, our phrase is, for the good of all beings. There is no PowerPoint presentation, you'll notice, because I don't go well with them. I don't rise to that challenge very well. And I'm a Druid, and I don't need it. I don't need a PowerPoint presentation, and neither do you, because we're going to do the internal PowerPoint presentation now. Because you all have trained minds and sharp intelligences. So I'd like you to imagine that I'm transmogrifying in front of your eyes into a little man with very little hair, roundy glasses, and a sort of walrus moustache. And we're just whizzing by Druidic magic down to Sussex, which Kipling loved so very well. And he's going to show you one of his favourite places. And if you want to, you can shut your eyes or lower them and imagine what Kipling is telling you about his favourite landscape. And it's called Puxon, I'm sure you'll know it. And I have shortened it slightly, with apologies to Kipling. See you the dimpled track that runs all hollow through the wheat. Oh, that was where they hauled the guns that smote King Philip's fleet. See you our little mill that clacks, so busy by the brook. She has ground her corn and paid her tax ever since Doomsday Book. See you our pastures wide and lone where the red oxen browse. Oh, there is a city thronged and known ere London boasted a house. And see you and ditch and wall, Well, that was a legion's camping place when Caesar sailed from Gaul. And see you marks that show and fade like shadows on the downs. They are the lines the flint men made to guard their wondrous towns. Trackway and camp and city lost, salt marsh where now is corn, old wars, old peace, old arts that cease, and so was England born. She is not any common earth, water or wood or air, but Merlin's Isle of Gramarye, where you and I will fare. Okay, and Kipling disappears, and I reappear in front of you to say that illustrates very well an aspect view of the land, and a view, it talks about history and ancestry, it talks about my identity in my piece of land and the intimacy I can experience. And that's why I called it sort of think global, act local, because we'll get on to, in the second part of the talk, we'll get on to the difference between sacred sites and the sacred place that we actually live. And we'll get into the idea of an intimacy with the more than human world and the different layers of consciousness which allow a place to be the field where I trip over and sting myself, and also Merlin's Isle of Gramarye simultaneously. I once heard an anthropologist talk, and he talked very particularly about people. He didn't say stones, rocks, humans. He said the stone people, the rock people, the human people. And I thought, oh, he's a bit affected, isn't he? What do you mean by that? And I very soon realised I was completely wrong, of course, because stones, rocks, humans are completely different. But if we're all people, then there is the possibility of communication. People communicate with each other. And of course, as many of the people who've spoken today have proved, the land itself calls to us. So call it a land person, call it a genius loci, call it a spirit of the forest. Doesn't matter what we call it, we must, once we know that we can communicate with it, then we can work together for the good of all beings. And our job in making that connection is not to try and get somewhere else. It is to be fully embodied. Druids love life. They love to celebrate life. It's what Peter Owen Jones was talking about, the sensuousness of life. You know, so we are not, we don't wear hair shirts under our robes. You know, we're more like to wear silk combs or something like that. What is worn under the robe, of course, is obviously must remain a Druid secret. But make sure we'll be more than comfortable, because we love the nice things of life. We don't like excessive waste. We don't want to pillage the earth for our facile wants. We believe in living simply and loving the life that we're in. And our job, as I said, is to be creative and to be of service and to emulate the teachers of old. Our body is a bridge into the other worlds we can also experience when we go into the wild. From our Celtic ancestry, and from that period we call the Bronze Age and then leading on to the Iron Age, we get a particular view of the world from their wonderful flowering of creativity. If anyone hasn't seen the Celtic exhibition in the British Museum, please go and just be amazed by the creativity of our ancestors. But from their stories as well, we get the idea that they had a mythopoetic view of landscape, which I'm sure everyone here who goes into landscape also has. That the earth itself, there is a narrative strain in the earth. The earth has a story which we have to listen to. We don't go out full of ourselves. We go out to listen to and observe the earth's natural story. When people hear the call of nature and they go out to be still and to listen. We'll get onto that a bit more as well. Even Kipling was in his thing, he was describing the places in the landscape, the little brook, the little mill, as if they had sentient life. The Celts believed that the world was inspirited. The spirits of the holy wells, the spirits of the hills, the spirits of the caves, and so on. And again, once a thing has spirit, and we have spirit, is another of those connection words. It means we can start communicating. When we realise this, that we live in an inspirited world, there is an immense relaxation in opening our senses to the larger than human world. Because just to live in a world of communication with only other humans is exhausting. It might have been all right, I think, in Victorian times, when the husband had the library and the woman had the parlour, and, they could jolly well knock before they went in, and we live in really overcrowded times. We're all on top of each other all the time. We're bombarded by music and external influences. And so just to go into nature is an immense relaxation. And to, I was told before I was married, practically the day before actually, it was a very useful thing to be told. Perhaps the timing was a bit off. An hour's heavy weeding has saved many a marriage. Heavy. Okay. And of course we all know this, don't we? We know that this is true. Going into nature is restorative. You go out and you're really cross and it's all the other person's fault, and your perspective changes immediately. You're away from humans and into nature. And you march around a bit and everyone is still really irritating, but maybe you were a bit irritating too. And gradually that lovely, it silts down just to become past experience that becomes part of the lives that human beings have to live together. So there's an immense relaxation, and something, even people who live the poorest and least resourceful lives still understand that this connection with nature is the thing that is necessary. It's intuitive. It's so deeply intuitive, they do not realise it often. But we've got a policeman who's a Druid, and he's in charge of the Royal Parks in London. Fabulous job, he can see the jays and he feeds the blue tits. And he also finds all the suicides, much more serious part of his job, because he finds that when people really feel that the world is too much for them, like wounded animals, they go back to nature. And my friend Chris Hughes has written a book about a pagan perspective on dying, which is his specialist subject. And the best chapter is about how when you're in nature, you are never alone. So if you have a relative who has died in nature, even in tragic circumstances, they were never alone. They were surrounded by the natural world that would have supported them at that time, even if there was no human being near to them. So Fiona was talking the other day about how autonomous we are. We're autonomous energy fields, and the Earth is an energy field, but actually the two must interact for our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. I think it's very interesting to think that in our parents' lifetime, a person could just be a walking, living landscape. If you think about it, they might never move more than 5-6 miles away from from where they were born. They might, I'm talking about a rural community, they would work on a farm, they would eat the animals, the chickens, the eggs, whatever, they would eat the potatoes they produced. Quite probably they would get wool from the sheep, or let's take it a bit further and say their leather, their linen, it could all be locally produced. They would eat the food, they would excrete the food back into their, down the bottom of the garden, and then when they died, they would enrich the soil. So they are actually part of a living landscape. They are the living landscape. Just happens to be a bit more mobile than the trees in the other parts of the landscape. It's wonderful to think that someone could have that connection. Never have heard of Druidry or anything like that. Have an intimate connection with the land, a real connection, where they get really cross, where they'd swear at the frost and the snow and the hail. That's what we do when we're intimate with people. We behave really badly towards them. You know, we're all polite here. You know, when we get home, we drop our party manners. When you're intimate with the soil, you can say, "Will you stop doing that?" to a bramble, you know, because it tripped you up 3 times and you're jolly well fed up with it. So it's interesting that practically in our lifetime, someone could have lived that simply. Fiona said, the garden is the mirror of who we are. And so I would say it's true of the landscape. The landscape is the mirror of who we are. Our idea is to, as we go out into the landscape on our small or our large pilgrimages, is to internalise that landscape, to get a real feeling of its connection. So it's a living part of us. And it's not so much that the landscape is a reflection of us or vice versa, it's that by the very act of doing that, we are being changed by the landscape. We don't have to do anything. We just have to go out and walk regularly. And like an alchemical, and with awareness obviously, like a sort of alchemical experiment, by bringing our awareness to ourselves walking in the landscape, that causes internal changes within us. I think it makes us saner and happier. It also gives us a wonderful context for living as humans, as I say, a wider context, a more relaxing context. When Peter was talking about the spell of the sensuous, he had this wonderful expression, so I tried to write it down. He said, if we are not attuned to the howling of wolves, the honking of geese, then we rob our senses of their integrity. We want to turn up the volume on the natural world. And when you go to your room to meditate and to be calm and still, what images do you allow to arise? Because in the Western mystery tradition, I would contend, we do not try and, traditionally, we don't try and empty our minds. What we do is allow appropriate images into our minds to keep the conscious mind busy in order for us to sink down deep so we can get the subconscious messages up. That's my understanding of it. It seems that the Western mind likes pictures and images. The more we go into the land, the better vocabulary we have for that. If you've actually seen the kingfisher yesterday, wow, what an image to take into your meditation. If you've actually just stayed in and watched Coronation Street, you know, you haven't got quite, you can look at a lily or this beautiful thing, but it's not the same as going out into a living landscape and bringing the vocabulary back in order to paint your pictures in your mind. The premise of my tree book is to be as a tree. Not to think about it, not to meditate on it, just in the middle of the day, at any time, just think, what would an oak tree think about this? What would a birch? What would a yew? And immediately, you might get an image of yourself under a great big tree saying, what on earth are you doing there? What are you doing? Just get immediately putting yourself into another part of nature gives you a sense of perspective that helps you with your everyday life. None of this takes you away from your everyday life. The whole object is to bring ideas into your everyday life, which will enrich them and make you better able to cope with what is, I think, a very, very stressful world these days. So, sacred space, Druid style. Druids dance with this dynamic. The whole world is sacred. Everything is sacred. The living earth, the place where you have your being, is sacred. Some places are more sacred than others. So how does that work? Eh? Because there are these recognised pilgrimage routes, and they draw people by their thousands, and there are reasons for this. Well, it's a very Peter Knight said, there are lots of simultaneous landscapes, some of them internal, and there are lots of worlds in the Druid worldview, and some of those are internal as well. So the second internal PowerPoint is a tiny little one. If you just shut your eyes so you can imagine a great big sort of bullseye, what's it called, dartboard, archery board, and it's got 3 circles. It's got the bullseye, it's got the next one, it's got the next one, and it's on a golden background. We'll have gold for divinity. and the places where the human mind can't go. Then you step into your first circle, and that is blue, and we'll call that Wynvith. That is the outer world of the Druids. And we step into the next one, the middle circle, and that is green. There you are, you feel at home there, because that is our world, the world of the five senses. We call it Arbret. And then you look into the third one. Is it black? Is it silver? It's sort of shimmery. You can't quite get a handle on that. That is Anum. And that is the one that we most interact with. Okay, so you've got that clear in your mind. Gwynvith, the outer one, the realm of the summer stars. This is the natural place of the broad overview of the bardic place. Taliesin, pre-eminent bard, said, "My natural home is the place of the summer stars." Arbret is the world of the five senses. Anum, the deep, dark, bright, unknowing place. It can be one thing, it can be another, but it impacts on the Druid view of sacred space. So one of the things it can be is a magical world where the people are long-lived and gracious, and the trees fruit and flower and burgeon all at the same time. And human beings, heroes, can interact with this world. The other way it can be perceived is as a great big cauldron of inspiration, permanently bubbling up, dead things going in, new things coming out, and never stopping, never stopping. Now, this is not literal, obviously this is imaginal, but there is a reason why some places are regarded as more sacred than others. My contention is that this Druid worldview works in that if some places seem to have a more powerful resonance, just as the Earth's crust is thin in some places and a volcano might shoot up, why not say the Earth's crust is thin there? That is where the regenerative powers of Anum, which cause new growth every spring, having used all the dead things every autumn, why not just let's speculate that that is where the regenerative powers of Anum are bubbling up and are more apparent to us. Because one thing about recognised sacred space is that it makes it easy for us. It makes it easy for us to recognise. Sometimes you go to Findhorn, you might recognise it as sacred space. When it was a, a sort of a dump with a couple of, a caravan park, yes, with loads of mess and a few old caravans. Who would have perceived it as sacred space then? That space had an inherent sacred nature, but it's been made apparent by humans. When you get to places like St. Nectan's Glen, full of beauty, transfiguring beauty, or you get somewhere weird, like Glastonbury Tor, just sticking up in the middle of the flatlands for no apparent reason, and they draw people like magnets. There seems to be something in the topography that lets you know that this land is special. And we know it's sacred because of the effect it has on us. What is sacred? It's just a word. Were the monasteries sacred to the Vikings who sacked them? No, they had no understanding of that. They were sacred to the, were the reliquaries and so on sacred? No. Unless we acknowledge the sacred, then it is not there. It can be despoiled. But there is something in the inherent nature of these very special places that everyone of any sensitivity recognises. And that is why it is really good to go on pilgrimage to recognise sacred places. Because they encourage you to act in certain ways. They encourage you to make an effort to get there. Always good. Focuses the mind wonderfully. They encourage you to slow down, and they take you out of all the points of reference of your normal life. And therefore, your mind is open and free to epiphany, to special experience. So they are very, very valuable things to do. And just planning a pilgrimage, and let's face it, it's a load of hassle when you're planning your, you've got 2 weeks off work in the summer and you've got to fit in the children, you've got to do this and that. To actually cleave a weekend out of that to do a special thing for yourself, or yourself and your partner, is a really big deal. And to make that effort and that energy in itself promotes the idea in your mind of pilgrimage keeps it to the forefront. When I do ritual workshops, we always put on the letter, regard the journey as a pilgrimage. The workshop starts as you pack your car or get on the bus. And it's surprising what comes out in the first talking circle after that. Actually going to a recognised place makes it easy for us to get into that mindset, which is very good for us. One other thing that Sacred Space does, because we're thinking about an interactive world, it encourages, it draws not only people, but it draws myth and legend. There is something in the place that inspires people's creativity. It draws myth and legend around it, like, like bees around honey, or whatever the expression is. So you get loads of myth and legend. You get any tall, unusual hill. There's always a king buried under it. Always. How disappointed people are, the Victorian explorers, when they realise there weren't kings buried under them, because everyone knows there should be. And we know that those kings come out at certain times of the year, and they gallop around and then they go back in, and they've got a treasure hoard full of gold and so on. Every sacred space gathers these myths. When we see a beautiful spring, every spring has its nymph to whom you can petition and pray, and that's why we saw the clooty rags and so on, the trees. Glastonbury is particularly interested in this because I think it was Philip who was saying about the land allows the amalgam of the pagan and the Christian. And Dion Fortune made the point that no one can claim Glastonbury. You've got the Christian abbey, you've got the pagan Tor, you've got the myths of Jesus and the Grail, and you've got the sword of King Arthur, and you've got Gwynedd Neath and the Celtic gods, side by side, with a very narrow little lane between them, and they all coexist happily. So the land has a very particular role in allowing, Glastonbury in particular, allows people to believe exactly what they want and take exactly what they need from it. Where have we got to? Yeah, interestingly, very interestingly, I don't know where I've got to with this, but I wanted to make the point which Peter Dawkins mentioned about the three aspects of I think he said power and strength and beauty, isn't it? And in my book on Druidry, I was very proud of myself because I actually developed a three-ray practice which comes from Dion Fortune, because she used exactly the same system to work magic and to be balanced. You have power, which is nature, the power of nature. You have knowledge, and you have beauty. And of course, they translate very nicely onto the tree of life as Hode and Netzach, and then above two spheres, and above them, Tiferet, beauty, the heart sphere, the sun sphere, the sphere of the sacrifice god, the sphere of King Arthur and of Jesus. And the sphere, of course, which, if you draw the tree of life along the Michael line, that is exactly where Glastonbury is situated. One of those nice little synchronicities. So that's an aside, but I just wanted to bring it in. Because, as I say, we're all coming to these things from different points of view and sort of arriving at the same place. What we have to remember is that there is a time and a season for making pilgrimage. And with great knowledge comes great responsibility. So every time we get on a plane or take a long distance travelling, we have to balance that against the needs of the world. So we don't do these things too often. But there is a time and a season for it, and we should not feel that we have to apologise or explain to anyone about our choices. We get on that plane and we take responsibility for it. It is worth it to us. We don't even have to work out our air miles and how many trees we'll plot. We keep an intuitive sense of what we need and what the earth needs. We keep our balance sheet, so we're happy with it. And we don't have to explain to anyone else, or justify ourselves, because in the modern world, the world that Stuart Wilde called the world of tick-tock, 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 slowing down is a subversive act. So, we're all subversives, isn't that wonderful? Makes me feel really cool. And it really helps as well when you are in that world of TikTok, which I frequently am, and actually it's so much easier just to write another email than just to light a candle or go into the garden and say hello to the roses. And it's so easy, isn't it, just to get caught up in that method of being that just really wastes your life with its busyness. So, the good thing about that pilgrimage, that long pilgrimage we've made, is the time and the effort and the energy we put into developing our spirituality ourselves, the good that we get from just being in the land, and our rational mind will never understand that, but our deeper mind does. And then, of course, the wonderful thing is that we bring back that experience and it has changed us. And we bring back the lessons of it to our lives, in our everyday lives. And it helps us to recognise our own place as sacred. And our own place, as I say, what is sacred, is made sacred by our awareness. We go and see the most beautiful garden in the world. It's been a little bit of a pilgrimage. You know, it seems like a sacred place, although it has no religious associations. And we come back and we look at our own garden with new eyes. And we get out with it. We do something. We change something for the better. We put our attention and our awareness into the place that really matters, our own place, our own home. We bring our history and our story to our own home. If we pray or we meditate in our gardens or our houses, we are bringing a sense of a sacred holding space. Even though we haven't got the luxury of a lovely meditation room or whatever, it just means we have to tidy the bedroom a bit, you know, just for decency's sake, before we sit on the bed and do that 5 or 10 minutes. But it's long pilgrimage helps us to bring back that awareness. And then you forget a bit, and then you write up your diary or read it back, and you remember again. And again, you remember the change. And it's incremental. We are changed by these experiences. We tend our area with awareness, with relationship, with mythopoetic eyes, and we acknowledge the story of our immediate environments. The actual story, the history of it, and the mythopoetic story, the way we relate to the narrative strain of the land. And the advantage, of course, in our own place is that we can know it through the seasons. So we only go for a long pilgrimage once a year, once every 3 years or whatever, but our own place we can know throughout the seasons. And so there is a quality of depth about the relationship. And of course, that again has a practical knock-on effect, because then if our environment is threatened, we are actively participating in saving it because we have a relationship with it. How are we doing for time?
We're fine.
Are you sure? Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
about 9 minutes, something like that.
That's lovely, thank you. So, Peter Dawkins says, we obey the call of the land. What do Druids do? We use that call. So it's quite nice, I think, going away, thinking, I realise I'm just preaching to the choir and you all know all this stuff, but it doesn't hurt, as it doesn't hurt to do the same walk several times. Every time you rehear a piece of information you know, it just lodges it in your brain in a different way. So let's start with the effects. We gain perspective from contact with the non-human world. We access deep places. We get into a deep meditative state, and we access places that we can trust. So that when we're very agitated up here, we're able to just drop our awareness down and know that there is a safe, deep place that we've met many, many times by going on our daily or our weekly walk, and we know that it's there, a more calm and a more witnessing place. Just as the land itself is a calm and a witnessing place, it's been there forever. The trees, Druids love trees. Why? Because we like trees. It takes a long time to have a chat with a stone, but a tree, it's got a longer lifespan than us, but we can understand its lifespan, a couple of 100 years. You know, it's got a trunk like us. It's got, I can't remember, It's got lots of things like us. It's got lots of things, and it is of service, of course. It feeds us, it shelters us, it warms our fire. You know, it gives us a lot of lessons. So by being around that, we access this deep place that we can trust at stressful times, and the accessing of this place also allows our dormant sense of creativity to arise. So that by the time you've been around the park six times, you're actually chatting into the trees. This is your own little personal pilgrimage route we're talking about now. The sort of thing you can do when you've done your marketing on a Saturday. Do it in 10 minutes. No one knows you're doing it. You don't have to wear a robe or anything. What you do, you walk around and you just say hello. You acknowledge the landscape. Acknowledge it through your body, through your breath, through the elements. So how do we acknowledge it through the elements of earth? Well, to get into the mindset, one of the things you might do is imagine you've got thank you carved on the soles of your shoes. So every breath. So just walk along. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When you've developed your route, develop portal places. So you think, oh, that's a gate, that's a portal. I walk through 2 trees here, that's a portal. And so on. So that you don't have to linger for very long, but when you set out and you stop at a portal place, imagine, if you can't feel it, you're sinking deeper into a state of being aware of the landscape, and it will work. And then you walk around. If you've got an orientation, you might want to stop at the north, south, east and west, just very briefly, and acknowledge those qualities. This is the nitty-gritty of personal practice, and it can be combined with dog walking. So that's really, really useful. The definition of a pilgrimage, of course, is a journey to a sacred space or shrine. Well, that works perfectly, doesn't it? If we're making our own spaces, our own homes, into sacred places, places of nurture and love, then that's wonderful, because every time we take a little walk, we are making our way back to our own sacred place, our own shrine. In my book, I was very pleased with the Druidry book that I put in lessons from the Mabinogion, because the Mabinogion is this weird hodgepodge of tales which says there are kings, there are queens, they disappear, they change into animals, they do this, they do that. I think, what's that got to do with me as a Druid? Well, actually, a lot, I think. If you read fiction as if it's a magical textbook, you can get a lot of lessons. If you read a poem, one of Jay's or Philip's poems, as if it's an instruction manual, read it as poetry first, it's beautiful. Then read it, see what is happening in the poem. Think, if I emulated that, if I went out to emulate that experience, what would I have to do? I'd have to take my shoes off, I'd have to go out at dawn, it would have to be raining, or whatever the poem is about. Then see what experience you have. Same in the Mabinogion. In the story of Puck. Puck has a dream, he has a vision, he has to go somewhere. So he goes there, he goes hunting, he gets lost, he gets separated from everyone, he ends up in liminal space. What happens? Magic happens. Very quickly. What has that told us? Providing it's legal and moral and safe, obey your intuition. That's the first thing. If you can do it, you get an intuition, do it. If you want to encounter the magical, get separated. Go somewhere different. Don't hang around with your friends. Don't go for your walk with your friends, chattering about the children or whatever. Go by yourself. Go into liminal space. Go into somewhere a little bit, still safe, but a little bit more wild, a little bit unusual. And just see, because when you do that, you can look with completely fresh eyes and encounter the magical. And the one thing that I was very pleased about yesterday was when Peter and various people were talking about wonderment. Because the first thing you do before you go on one of these little walks, just to walk around the park, is you set your intent that you will be open and aware to any lessons. And often I don't know what, you want it to be a general intent. If I set my intent to see kingfishers, well, I'm just going to miss the jay and the squirrels. You know, you don't want to be too focused. So what I found works very well is to say, may I see wonders? That is my standard thing. I don't care what they are. I ask for them. And then my eyes are open to any wonders they might be. It might be a dog chasing its tail, which might fill me with ecstatic mirth because I'm looking with fresh eyes at it and they're really, really funny. Or it might be the most wonderful, cosmic revelation in the world. I don't mind. I really don't care. I'm very lucky because we have swallows that fly around our knees in our park, so sometimes I secretly think, and let it be swallows, but I never say that. So let's just go through the list. Have set portals, set your intent, go on the same route, because then you get to know somewhere quite intimately. Go as a student. I think one of Jay's poems said, be quiet, just be quiet. And because what we find is that when people come to a spiritual life, they are so nice and so full of altruism, they desperately want to help the world, the natural world, desperately. And it's a very laudable, we all do, it's a very laudable intention. But actually, we go as students to the world. We are going to listen to the world. And the portal places and stopping allow us to slow down. We make connections to the elements, and we stop concentrating on the visual. If you find it difficult to do, you all over rely on the eyes. Lower your eyes and tune in with your ears. And roll your sleeves up and tune in with your skin. And become aware of the noise of the birds. Song, I should say, that's more polite. The song of the birds and the breeze and so on. Find a place to stop. Can be a bench. Get out your paper so no one thinks you're a weirdo. You don't have to read it. And then just tune in and see what you experience. You go through the senses again. How does your mouth taste? How does the air smell? How does it feel against your skin? And so on. Use the body as a bridge between what is happening and the imaginal world. And have no expectations at all. It's all very easy. It's really, really simple. The trouble is maintaining it. The trouble is keeping it up, maintaining awareness. What I'd like to do is read you a poem now from an eco-educator who is a Druid and who had one of these, because he maintains focus very easily. He's a Blake maniac. He knows Blake intimately enough to call him Big Bill Blake, which I would never have the temerity to do. Fortunately, his wife does the driving, because he's a bit of a nature mystic. And he's written this book called this poem called Spirits of the Motorway. And we're going to we started with the Kipling. We're sort of going to sum up with that in a last conclusion. Because how many people rushing by on a motorway ever think of the history of the land, the history of the ancestors, and the earth that was displaced to make the motorway? Barry got that going at 70 miles an hour, who knows where. And I think it's worth relating. So you can imagine, if you want, now you're all in your cars, and you've all got a nice person driving you, and as you zip past, maybe you become aware of the trees and the hidden life of the forest, and maybe that sort of little glow around that says, this is liminal space, because actually on the edge of motorways is liminal space. Nothing lives there, no humans ever go there. It's a wonderfully magical space that we can't access. Barry is a performance poet, and I am most definitely not. But I'm going to do something potentially quite embarrassing, and it will be for the first 2 seconds, but we'll all get over that, that's no problem, and we'll all get into it. It would really help if you see me with great big hairy legs wearing a kilt, holding a baran, great big beard and a thick Geordie accent. And that will really encourage me in this thing that I'm not used to doing, really. It's called The Spirits of the Motorway, and again, I've had to chop quite a bit out of it. Oh, you spirits of the motorway, I see you line the roadside standing there. You watch us as we all rush by on our flights of fancy from the here and now. We rage, we roar, we fly so swiftly by. The weightless gazes of our ancestors, all unseen, deep in the dreaming of the land. Oh, you spirits of the motorway, you come from Henge Age, singing on the hill. You hid amongst the oaks of wind-whispered lore. You toiled in the sweaty summer fields. You hunted, fought, and founded dynasties. And now you watch us from your timeless home, deep in the dreaming of the land. Oh, you spirits of the motorway, it must be love and pity holds you here, watching us in our sad, high-speed parade and calling to us gently, heed the sun. The moon and stars are counting out your time. Leaves of the seasons, life on earth, deep in the dreaming of the land. Oh, you spirits of the motorway, I acknowledge and honour your presence here. For my part, I can sing the songs of life, though walls of doubt are thrown up all around. So keep us tired travellers safe from harm, and bless us with your wisdom and your strength, deep in the dreaming of the land. And that's Barry's take on the spirits of the motorway. And a man who really, really can hold his focus of being in two worlds, of making his way and working in the everyday world, of coping with married life, all those things, and yet have an awareness of the greater life around him. He's helped by the fact that he's a very talented geologist. So Druidry, to conclude, is like all magical systems. It's about the marrying of inner and outer experience, and contacting the wisdom of the earth is vital for that. And there are no shortcuts. In a world that pulls us constantly away and distracts us, we have to keep practicing all the time. We have to have a constant, regular connection. Now in Glastonbury, there's a sanctuary of silence. And there's a motto above the door. And the sanctuary was originally founded by the mystic Ronald Heaver. And above the door it says something like, not those unhelpful classical things like, know thyself. And what does that mean, for goodness? It says, enter this space as if you are entering a cathedral, as if the wings of the 4 archangels are fluttering above your head, as if divinity can enter this sacred space. And I think when we go on pilgrimage, no matter how long or how short, each day or each time we do it, we can paraphrase that. And we could go on pilgrimage as if the earth is alive, because we know it is. As if we can learn from its wisdom, because we know we can. And acknowledge the fact that we will learn in a way that is far too deep for the rational mind ever to understand, if we trust that just having that contact is of immeasurable benefit for us. And that, to my mind, is living Druidry. Thank you very much.
Penny, thank you so much. That was a very beautiful and very powerful description of Druidry, and a very practical. It's so practical. It was lovely, very loving, and I just feel it's so close to what Gatekeeper is about, particularly that last bit about honouring the sanctity of the land and what it has to give us, and nature, what has to give us. So thank you very much. It's beautiful.